I still didn't have gut strings.
Really? Okay.
So I ordered my first set of gut strings before I went to Mexico. And then when I got back, they had arrived like on January 1st or something, and the audition I think was on January 3rd. So
well, talk about a quick adjustment period.
Yeah,
right?
it was. I had like I think 2 or 3 days on those strings to try to figure out, and that was somehow I managed to pull it off. But it was I'm a lot more familiar with them now, needless to say.
It has been such a pleasure getting to know Kristin Zoernig here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and it's so cool to be able to sit down and dig deep into bass, careers, styles of music, all that kind of good stuff. And that's what today's conversation is with Kristin. Kristin plays with many groups, but is best known perhaps for her work with Philharmonia Baroque, a wonderful early music group here in the Bay Area. She also plays with the American Bach Soloists, Oregon Bach Festival, a new project called the Cantata Collective. You're going to be hearing a couple of clips from that before and after our conversation, and so many other groups you'll hear in this conversation. Kristin also wanted me to share, we didn't really dig too much into all the people she studied with, so I want to briefly, before we start, just list some of the teachers that she's had over the years, and also a little bit about her gear. I start asking about gear, and then I take us in another direction. So Kristin got started with Lou Israel, then she worked with John Grossman. At Interlochen, she studied with Jack Budrow, Chris Brown, and Jeff Bradetich. She then stayed with Jeff at Northwestern for a bit, then moved to Norway, where she studied with Knut Guettler, but also Dan Styffe, who's a past podcast guest. And then when she came back to the United States, she studied with Gary Karr. Now, in terms of gear, she's playing on handmade gut strings by, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Damian Dlugolecki. Apologies if I butchered that. And she also uses Parastral olives. In terms of bows, her Baroque and classical / transitional bows are made by Ralph Ashmead. So that's a bit about Kristin, much more as we dive into this conversation. And I do want to give a quick shout out, apologies for the length of this intro, but to our sponsors, Steve Swan String Bass, D'Addario Strings, Upton Bass, and A440. More on them later, but let's jump into this conversation, recorded live on the street in Oakland, California, sitting in the sunshine and chatting with Kristin Zoernig. So I make sure I get it right, because I've screwed this a bunch of times. Just say your last name a couple times.
Zoernig.
Okay, that's what
Zoernig.
I thought.
Yeah, you don't really pronounce the O.
I have not done that, even when I'm like really confident, and then I like jack up someone's pronunciation, and then I screw them over because people will listen, and then they like come up to them pronouncing their name wrong because I did it right. So I've like I'm actually not. It's not that often that people pronounce it right, so really okay.
So it won't be a problem.
Good. Well, I'm glad I.
Everyone always wants to say Zoernig, which is very understandable because that's how it looks.
Yeah. Okay, so this is and again, it's not live at all. So like, I have a couple folks that help with editing. So if you want to say anything again or whatever, it's not. It's not.
Don't put that in there.
Yeah. That's fine. Well, because then it's that if something goes weird, like I was chatting with somebody in Chicago a couple weeks ago, and I asked this really awkward question, and then I realized like the dumbness of my question, and then she was trying to answer it, and then it's like, okay, let's move on. And it's completely my fault. But something that it might be kind of interesting. So, can you just talk about what the different groups you're playing in right now? It's like Philharmonia Baroque is a big portion of your year. What else do you do in a given year?
Well, I play, I do freelance outside of Philharmonia, so I have a lot of whatever happens. Basically, I'm open agent, free agent. But one of my exciting new projects is the Cantata Collective, and I actually brought a CD for you.
Fantastic.
To check out.
Cool.
Get that to you,
okay.
hopefully.
Sweet.
And it's just a season highlight CD, so it's not a real formal, production, but you can get an idea of what's that about. And that's a whole lot of fun. It's a small group, basically a quartet plus bass and keyboard, whether it be organ, like portative organ, or harpsichord, and oboe.
Okay.
And it's expandable sometimes, depending on we're starting out with the smaller cantatas, and we're going to work our way through all of the cantatas. And so it's going to take 10 years or so to get through them, which is great to have a project like that with such a large scope. And so we're going to end up being a much larger group for some of that stuff.
Okay.
And we invite singers, of course, sometimes just single singer, and it'll get up to a quartet and even more, even I think a sextet at some point. But it's been really exciting. We're giving free concerts on Sundays. Not every Sunday. It's select 5 Sundays this year. We did 4 last year. Last year was our inaugural season, and it was just huge success.
Oh, cool. Everything
packed, all the concerts packed, and we have a model of the concerts are free, but we have a member. The collective part of it is actually the member, is the audience instead of the players. I suppose it also extends to the players eventually once we branch out a little bit more, but it's a pretty cool design where audience members can sign up, join, basically at different contribution levels, and they get different things for the different levels. And we provide them with scores at the concerts and their choice of seating and whatnot, and little dinner parties and thing at the end of the season, and special letters and whatnot. So it's fun, and it's been very well supported, and we're very happy about it. So it's a great project to dive into, and it's nice to be in a smaller chamber music setting, doing the great music of those cantatas. It's just an endless bounty of wonderful stuff. So so it's been a lot of fun. So that's one group. Another group I play with. I play a little bit with New Century Chamber Music. So I'm chamber orchestra. I play modern as well.
Yeah.
So whoever calls me for that. But I just played with did my first year with the Berwick Academy faculty up in Eugene at the Oregon Bach Festival, and that was a whole lot of fun. So I was teaching it's a program for emerging professionals who've already exhibited some dedication to the early music field in terms of like buying equipment or instruments, already have some bit of education in the field and just wanting to learn more. So there was a very ambitious young group and very eager to learn, and a whole lot of fun. And then I was also in the Baroque Orchestra. They have a modern orchestra and a Baroque orchestra there, and so I was the bass player in the Baroque Orchestra.
Nice.
And just a whole lot of fun. Eugene is a wonderful town.
Oh, I love Eugene. My brother went to University of Oregon, so I remember going out to Eugene and just falling in love with the place. And
it's a great little town.
Yeah.
And so. And now they've invited me up to play. I'll be going back next year, and they've invited me to. There's a new chamber orchestra there, and they're doing a little Baroque concert. They want me to come in March, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do that. So I'm negotiating for that right now. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get the time away to do that. Yeah. But in addition, I just got invited to be an adjunct faculty member at the UC Berkeley Early Music Department.
Oh,
so I'll be teaching.
Congratulations! That's great.
Thank you. The bass and violoni players for that. So I'm getting into a little bit more teaching lately. I've always taught a little bit, but it's hard to have a studio of my own.
Yeah.
It's usually just been just because my schedule is so crazy. I have to, I think students should have regular, Monday lessons or whenever it is, and I just can't deliver on that. So.
Yeah.
So I don't have a big group of private students, but I teach. I teach a little bit through Philharmonia's educational program, and I teach adjunct also at the conservatory in the early music department, and then now Berkeley, and then Eugene, and so I'm starting to teach a little bit more. It works a little better if it's a institution like that where I don't have to have my own schedule open up for it. And then who else do I play for? There's. In terms of early music, there's a lot of local choirs and things that hire. There's And there's Baroque orchestras up and down the West Coast. So I've been down to L.A. and up to Seattle and to Portland and Sacramento and whoever calls.
Yeah.
Happy to play.
Yeah. So you are in the scene, teaching at Berkeley and going up and teaching at Eugene and playing Philharmonia Baroque and all the other projects. So you're a name that people know in the early music world and we'll need to do a round 2 at some point because there's no way we could talk about everything there is to talk about. But maybe, and we have some shared background too, so it'd be fun to dig into some of that. But maybe could you just take us into how you got into the early music world? Like, I'm assuming you did not start playing Baroque bass immediately. Like, how did that?
No, absolutely. I started bass when I was 9 years old, so I started pretty young, and I fell madly in love with it right away. I was very proud from day one.
Where'd you grow up?
Sioux City, Iowa.
That's right. Okay, so this is the fun. I remember we were talking about this. Kristin and I were playing Modesto Symphony maybe a year ago, and then we got together not too long after that. So I played in the Sioux City Orchestra, right. The Sioux City Symphony. When I was like 16 or 17, I would drive in this van with a bunch of adults from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, down to Sioux City. Okay, so Sioux City. So how? Okay, so a kindred spirit. So how?
I used to go to the symphony concerts back when I was a kid. My mom and dad played in that orchestra as amateurs. I mean, maybe they got paid. I don't know. Maybe they did get paid. But my mother was a French horn player. My father played viola.
So when I was there, it was at Morningside College.
That's where it was too.
Okay, and there was a conductor, at least when I was there, older gentleman. Tom was the first name. I'm blanking on the last name.
I haven't been to Sioux City for decades, so I have no idea who's doing it now.
So
it's been a long time.
How did you? I don't want to say escape Sioux City, but what was the next step after Sioux City? Sioux City's a lovely place. I'm sure I don't want to disparage anybody from Sioux City. Well, just while we're still on Morningside College, I started playing with the Morningside College Chamber Orchestra when I was about 12 years old. Get out of here, really?
And so I played with them quite a bit. And that was maybe my one of the earlier chamber music things I did. Although we had a very active musical community for children in Sioux City at the time. Thanks mostly in part to a wonderful teacher there named John Grossman, who just infused the whole town and all the schools and everything with just this incredible amount of energy, and he started all these projects. So I had lots and lots to do, and there was all state and all city orchestra, and then there was a Siouxland Youth Symphony Orchestra, and then the school orchestra and band, which I also played in, bass in the band. I never understood why. I could never hear me, but and so it was a very rich musical community, and there was a Sioux City Symphony, and there were a lot of visiting artists, the whole chamber music scene chamber music series that was going on. There was some really big artists coming, and but anyway, the way I got out of Sioux City was when I was 16. I had the opportunity I decided I wanted to go to Interlochen. I heard about it, Interlochen Arts Academy, and I had kind of been on a bit of a hiatus from practicing for about a year and a half or so, because I claimed that I claimed to hate. I was a teenager, and I was just going through teenager things. I claimed that I hated classical music, and I didn't want to. But in order to get my parents to sign my sports things, permit forms, they said I had to play in the school orchestra and in youth symphony. And so I kept playing through those mediums, but didn't practice at all. And then I don't know, I got a fire lit under me, and suddenly started coming. I was practicing privately, sneaking practicing at school, showing up in my free periods and practicing a little bit, and before and after rehearsals and stuff. And so finally I just gave up the ghost and admitted that I actually did like playing, which my parents knew. It was pretty obvious, I guess. And I'm grateful that they kept me going with it. But my bass teacher had told me about Interlochen, and I decided I wanted to go. And so he said, well, if you want to go, then you're going to have to And if you want a scholarship, which is the only way I'd be able to get there, I'd have to enter this state competition, solo competition, and if I won that, then I'd probably be able to get a scholarship to Interlochen. So I did that, and I did get a scholarship to Interlochen and went there for the summer initially. The World Youth, I played in the World Youth Orchestra there.
Was Henry Charles Smith your conductor? I don't remember if he was doing that at the time.
Yeah,
okay.
He was. Yeah.
I only asked because he was the conductor. This is Small World. He was the conductor, in addition to the World Youth Symphony, of the South Dakota Symphony for years and
really?
years.
Oh,
so
my
I
gosh.
played with him in the South Dakota Symphony.
Oh,
okay.
That's funny.
Carry on.
Yeah, he was great, and I got to play with incredible. Rostropovich came, and all kinds of amazing people. It's very competitive there. You have weekly challenges and things, and I came in at 4th chair with the initial audition, and then me and an oboist were the only ones to get through the whole summer without losing a challenge. So in 4 weeks, I made it up to the 1st chair, and then I stayed there for the last 4 weeks. So that was pretty cool, and that got me an invitation to go to the academy there, and so I did that, and I was out of Sioux City at that point.
Yeah.
And so I did my senior year of high school there, and then I stayed one more summer for their university division, and then stayed with my teacher, Jeff Bradetich, who I'd had there.
So Jeff was teaching at Interlochen at that time.
Him and Jack Budrow and Chris Brown.
Okay, Chris Brown, and not the hip hop artist Chris.
No, right.
But Chris Brown, from the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra,
exactly,
well known as a bow.
Yes,
I actually just saw him in Lucca, Italy. Actually,
yeah.
Okay, very cool. Okay, so in another
I hope he's doing well because the orchestra's changed a lot.
Yeah. No, I think he seemed to be doing well.
Philharmonia had a great. Nick McGeegan has been was associate conductor or somehow connected with the orchestra, St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, and he had arranged for. Well, I don't know if he did, but somehow Philharmonia and St. Paul did a joint concert one time, and so it was really great to reconnect with Chris Brown for that, and hang out with him at the reception afterwards and catch up, and it was a lot of fun.
This episode is brought to you by the A440 Violin Shop. It's located just down the street from Wrigley Field in beautiful Chicago on the north side, just off the Brown line. I have been going there my entire adult life, and they have been fantastic, both for repairs. I've had cracks repaired. I've had seams glued. I've had all sorts of students go to A440 to get instruments, to get bows. They're available with a smile, do wonderful work, and definitely check them out if you are in the Midwest. A440violinshop.com, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. Apply graphite, like pencil lead, to the bridge and nut, the contact points of the string, to ensure the strings slide smoothly on their way up to tension. This prevents them from getting stuck and unwinding or pulling the bridge so that it leans. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. My first good bow I ever bought from Chris. A lot of people probably have purchased a bow from Chris over the years, and I've tried out many bows, and he's an interesting guy too. He has... I know his bio. We haven't chatted. I should have him on the podcast at some point, but I remember his bio on the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra site. It would talk about everything he did, and then he was the lead in Jesus Christ Superstar
What?
at some point. Yeah.
Singing?
And I was like, prominently, yes. So I had no idea. And it's hard for me to picture Chris doing that, but I guess, so.
It's really hard to imagine. Wow.
So, and then another shared connection, so Jeff Bradetich, who I studied with some, and then you found yourself at...
Well, Jeff was at that time teaching at University of Michigan.
Yeah.
And he got me, I didn't feel like I had gleaned everything that I could from him yet after a year at Interlochen, and so I decided to go on studying with him, and he got me into U of M, and then over the summer he got a job at Northwestern, And so suddenly, toward the end of the summer, it turned out I was going to Northwestern instead of U of M, which was great.
Both good schools.
Yeah, really good school.
Yeah.
So I did that, and I was there for just 1 year. It turns out university wasn't really my thing. I really needed to be at conservatory. The School of Music was amazing and wonderful, and I had all kinds of great experiences there. And I learned a lot from Jeff. He's a really good teacher. Even at that time, he was really quite young. He was in his late 20s, I believe.
Yeah, he got started remarkably young. Yeah.
And he's really always been very devoted to pedagogy, and he's really worked hard, and I have a lot of admiration for him and the work he's done. And he helped me a lot. But I just wasn't cut out for the university scene and the whole huge, enormous school and all the sports and all the fraternities and sororities and the classes outside of the music department.
Yep.
I was already, committed to what I was doing, and those classes were just, basically a big bother. And so I was really happy to get the opportunity that summer following that year, while I was at the ISB convention, in fact, studying. I helped him arrange that and get it all going a little bit, and got to go to the convention as a result. And I had a couple master classes, and one of them was with Knut Guettler from Norway, who was my wild card. I decided to have one wild card for master classes, and that was it. And it's simply because he was Norwegian and a bass soloist. And I knew nothing about him, and I'm part Norwegian, so just by blood. But I was sort of raised. I'm a quarter Norwegian, but I was raised to believe I was 3/4 Norwegian.
As someone from your part of the country, I know exactly what that means.
So I just decided to do that just for fun, to see what was going on in the bass world in Norway, and we had an amazing, wonderful connection at the master class, just an immediate good rapport, and really. The stuff he suggested was very useful, and I was able to incorporate it very right there on the spot because of his just really great way of communicating. And he's a self-taught player primarily, and so he really knows how to explain things because he figured them out from the ground up himself. And so I learned a lot. Anyway, he invited me to go study with him at the Norwegian State Academy of Music in Oslo, Norway. And not really being happy with Northwestern outside the School of Music, again, was very good, but I just didn't like all the other crap that came with it. And I was also being harassed a lot for being gay, and that was no fun. So, and I was, in fact, a little afraid for my safety. So I jumped on this opportunity, and it was the best thing I could have done, really.
Was that in Oslo that you then went to?
I was in Oslo, yeah.
Okay.
It's right in the middle of Oslo. It's a great town.
Yeah. And a very different town from Evanston, Illinois, or Chicago, Illinois, I'm sure. And I've never been. I'm hoping to get there soon, but it must have been quite an experience.
The musical community there is very rich, and the government has poured all kinds of money into the arts community. They understand and they value what the arts contribute to society, and they've just really created a thriving environment for musicians and artists of all type. If you have an idea and want to do it, they'll fund it, which is how it should be.
Yeah, but how at least here in the United States often is not. But that's
not at all. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, and they're all you have to do is really literally is just have an idea and want to do it and have the resources to do it, or they'll provide the resources to do it and make it happen. So that was, the school was fantastic, and being a foreign student, I wasn't required to take the lecture classes. And since I wouldn't, be able to write papers and read the books and stuff, so So it was ideal situation for me because I could just take playing classes, ensemble classes, and so I took all of them. One of them was the early music ensemble.
So that's where
the transformation happened.
Okay, in Norway.
Ketil Haugsson was an amazing harpsichord player, prodigy of Gustav Leonhardt, who was really a kind of founder of the movement back in the 60s. He and a couple other people really kind of ignited the whole revisiting of the instruments and of the style, trying to incorporate the original style of playing into a modern aesthetic. Trying to figure out how to do that with how to play these instruments, again, and how to get these instruments playable again. Because a lot of the playing in the early days was very out of tune and just not very accessible, shall we say? Because of that. And they were kind of had a reputation. The early music community kind of had a reputation for if you can't, it's one of those things you do if you can't make it in the real world. It's like a very much a fringe kind of thing, and it's come a very long way since then. But I think it's mostly due to people just really, really, enjoying it so much and working hard to figure out how to play these instruments, and getting, the makers started making the instruments again, and so we had more instruments to play. More people were getting into more bows. The bow makers were making the bows. There's a whole wind instrument thing as well that I'm not as familiar with, but people started making gut strings again, which really only went out of style in about the 60s when the metal strings started coming around, 50s, 60s. I'm not exactly sure the timeline on the modern string development, but
it's interesting that the early music, the movement and the interest sort of came about. Probably it's coincidental, but as the steel string started to take over, right? Then when that. So okay, I never really thought about that. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting, and back then, even the strings weren't very good yet. The bows weren't very good yet. The instruments weren't. They still. It took a while for these things to develop and get better. So it wasn't just the players, but also the things we were using to try to do it.
Totally.
So and people were just basing their stylistic, quote unquote stylistic playing on there were no recordings, of course, but there are some treatises and quite a few treatises actually on bowing practices, and that have probably been the most useful. Fad in particular did a very interesting bowing treatise that's in very high regard nowadays, and there are several other print books that we're able to reference to, and then a lot of the music has been discovered since then and rediscovered, I guess. And so we're still doing modern premieres of this stuff. Like Philharmonia just did the very exciting Rameau modern premiere of the Rameau Temple of Glory, which was just a huge success, and it was just an amazing project. And so it's a very exciting field to be in, and for me I was mostly I just got into it at the conservatory, and I seemed to have a knack for it, I guess, and I was encouraged a lot to stick with it. At that time I didn't have gut strings or a period bow or anything to work with, but I was kind of choking up on my modern bow and just trying to match my sound to the other players around me, and so it wasn't until actually I came back to the United States 5 years later, in the middle of 1989. Actually, I went there in middle of '84, and I came back in the middle of '89, and so I'd had a few years with it. But I contacted one of the big reasons I came here was to try to get into Philharmonia. It was either going to be the Bay Area for Philharmonia and the early music scene there, or Holland. And my teacher in Norway was teaching at Den Haag, the Hague, and and I could have done like an assistantship with him and gotten work visa through that, and then tried to freelance through Europe and stuff. But I really feel like I made the right decision, because for one thing, I think that market is kind of saturated
over there.
Yeah. And also I think working conditions just aren't as good over there for the musicians as they are here. We've been able to secure a lot more rights and protections than they have over there, so I feel confident that I made the right decision. But anyway, so when I came back here, I contacted Philharmonia, and I told them I wanted to audition, and they replied that they weren't having any bass auditions now, but they'd keep me in mind. And but then in December already, so this was probably September, a couple weeks after I got there. And then just before Christmas, they told me, we're having a violin audition, and we realized we could have we'll have a jury assembled, and we thought maybe we could, if you want to come in at the end of that and do a bass audition, we'd love to hear you. So I did that, and I was put on the sub list, which I was incredibly grateful for. And then I started playing with them just as a sub occasionally, about once, sometimes twice a year. And every year I'd wait for my contract, or anything from them. And meanwhile, I was playing a lot of the church gigs and some other, there are a lot of little groups around that play early music. So I was getting some more experience. And I had to, actually, for that audition with Philharmonia, it was just after the New Year, and I had a trip planned to Mexico between Christmas and the New Year, and I still didn't have gut strings.
Really? Okay.
So I ordered my first set of gut strings before I went to Mexico, and then when I got back, they had arrived like on January 1st or something, and the audition I think was on January 3rd. So
well, talk about a quick adjustment period.
Yeah,
right?
It was. I had I think 2 or 3 days on those strings to try to figure out, and that was somehow I managed to pull it off. But it was. I'm a lot more familiar with them now, needless to say.
That's remarkable. I always feel like I'm wearing the shoes on the wrong foot when I go over to gut string. I'm not much of a gut string player, though. I've played. I've spent some very limited amount of time playing, but it's definitely like one of those. Just like everything about the way that they respond. It's just like a different modality.
Beast.
Yeah.
It's a different beast for sure.
That's awesome. That you. Wow.
It was pretty crazy. So I was lucky to get on that sub list. But then I was on the sub list for many years until I had the opportunity to audition for the principal spot. There's only one position on the bass of Philharmonia, and Michelle Burr, who I also learned a whole lot from. She was very patient with me. I'm very grateful to have had all that opportunity to work next to her. And she was a totally solid player and just a gentle teacher. Even though she wasn't officially my teacher, I learned a lot from her, and eternally grateful for that. But anyway, so she retired in 2005 and sold me her bass at an extremely reasonable, it was a ridiculously affordable price. And I think mostly she wanted the bass to stay with the orchestra.
Yeah.
And I was looking for a bass at the time, and she offered it to me, and I just thought, I'd gone to heaven, died and gone to heaven or something. And so I made it happen with the help of some friends. And so I got her bass, which is an incredible bass. I'm very fortunate to have it. I would never be able to have that instrument, if it weren't for her, or an instrument of its quality, if it weren't for her. So I've been very lucky on many fronts. But anyway, so I bought that bass from her, and I can tell you it was December 11th at 11 o'clock p.m. after we played the Messiah. She handed it over to me. Yeah. It was a big moment for me. And then in 2006, they had an audition for the bass job, and I was fortunate enough to succeed at that audition. and I've been principal bass with that ever since. And I'm very, I just feel so lucky to have the opportunity to get this much. First of all, to play with all the colleagues who are incredible musicians, and with Nick McGeegan and all the guest artists and guest conductors. It's just, I've learned so much from my colleagues, and they continue to inspire me.
Yeah.
Always a source of inspiration and motivation. And I think all of us kind of feel that way. It's a very special group with a unique attitude and structure and relationship with our management and conductor, and I feel very lucky to be involved in it at all, really.
Well, what a great path. And there's a path that, like, if you look at it just objectively, you're like, oh, well, that worked out really, that next step, that's logical. But, like, when you're living it and in it, like, it's probably, like, the chaos and the, like, is this going to work out? Is this going to... I'd love to... So, like, the structure of that group. So I played in that Elgin Symphony for 16 years. It's a Ropa orchestra, 40 concerts a year, that sort of thing. Like, what's the structure of that group like, and how's it maybe different from other orchestras?
Well, one essential ingredient, I think, is that the most of the positions are rotating positions. So we don't have one set concertmaster, one set principal second, one set principal cello, one. So I think it's really helped to keep the group healthy, and it keeps people motivated. Nobody gets too comfortable, too quick, or at all. which that may not sound ideal, but I think most of us anyway really appreciate that, and it we have a different sound, and to have people, the stands are always moving. We have different people playing next to each other, and the violins and all the strings, and so it's I think it just keeps things alive. It keeps them fresh, and people are constantly required to listen. If you're going to match your stand partner, you have to really listen and pay attention and try to match your bowing with that person, and so it just really keeps things fresh, and so I think it's a really healthy model. Our wind players, so our string players are mostly local, although we do hire outside the area, and the wind players are mostly not local, so they come in from all over the place. A lot of them from the East Coast, but also Canada, Europe, all over the place. So it's an interesting model, and I think a very good one.
In terms of management, like I've been in groups that have had pretty good management relations, and some that have had like absolutely atrocious. What's maybe unique about that relationship?
I think that part of it is that much of the audience has been with us practically since the beginning, and so I feel their dedication is on a par with the musicians, actually, and that's pretty unique right there. And the management has always been aware of that facet, and in terms of audience development and whatnot, and board development. And so that's, you get your board members from the audience, right?
Yeah.
And so if the board members come in with a fundamental appreciation for what the orchestra's mission is, and what their trajectory is, and what their focus, purpose, goals, all that, they're kind of behind that already. Yeah. And so I think that really, we've been blessed with most of the history of the ensemble. We've had very good boards, and it just seems to get better all the time, and they're very dedicated, and they work really hard, and they do, we couldn't do it without them.
Yeah.
For sure. And it's just, I feel like they're really behind what we're doing. A lot of the other orchestras we're in, that I'm in, that I've played in and stuff, there's this big divide. Management is like this corporate entity that we can't relate to at all, and we can't even speak their language, but it's just, I don't know, the management of Philharmonia has always been very personable and easy to approach as a player. Very willing to work with us on our, whatever our, struggle of the day, or, not, I don't want to say complaint, but just, challenge.
Yeah.
Or whatever the situation might be. In contract negotiations, I think they've always been very reasonable to work with. Even if we haven't always gotten everything we wanted, I think that they've been committed to trying to keep us happy.
Yeah.
Which often in the contract negotiations you feel like you're up against the enemy, and any little tiny little crumb you can get, you just somehow they make you grateful for that, and it's just, I just feel like they're very supportive and that they're on the same mission that we are. Mm-hmm. And that's feels totally special, very special.
For sure. And it's so cool that so much of the audience has been with you. They have that longevity, and then the board being drawn from them. Yeah, that's
mm-hmm.
a special relationship, and me and so many other people have been in that kind of contentious situation. So you can definitely, it's very desirable relationship.
Yeah, I feel very lucky. And it's funny, like we have receptions with donors and with board members and stuff, sometimes only orchestra, and management and board and stuff, and it just always, like, I actually want to go to those things, because it's just a whole bunch of really cool people who've had totally. Really cool careers, who are very just interesting to talk to and fun to hang out with. And like I've never felt that way in any other orchestra I've played with. I mean, there might be a select one or two that I might gravitate toward at these kind of events, but Philharmonia receptions, I'm just like looking around like, I gotta talk to everybody. Sorry, I gotta go. So it's pretty cool that way.
This episode is brought to you by Steve Swan String Bass. And Steve travels far and wide here in the Western United States. Here's Steve on where he goes and what some of the benefits of being able to travel like that are.
You travel with it. You're going up to Oregon. You're going up to Seattle.
Yeah. And back, out to Arizona, wherever people want to see a selection, they don't have options, or if I have a line on some basses I want to check out and maybe buy or trade, I have the option. That's the beauty of me not being tied to a workbench in a shop.
Steve works with some of the San Francisco Bay Area's best professional bass luthiers, people like Nathaniel Rich, Alex Friedman, and many others, to get basses playing beautifully. When someone comes to me asking where to look for a bass, whether they're a student or professional, or they're coming through town and they want to try out a great selection of basses, I always send them to Steve. Learn more at steveswanstringbass.com. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Steve. This episode is brought to you by the good folks at Upton Bass String Instrument Company. Eric and Gary and the whole Upton team, I can't say enough good things about them. And they have been on board with the various endeavors I've done online from the start. They were one of the early sponsors of the blog back in 2006 and 2007. And it has been so fun to follow along with their journey and see them develop these new models of basses like the Karr bass, the Bostonian, the Bohemian, and to connect with all these amazing players. I've had the privilege of speaking with so many people that play Upton basses, from Eric Rivas of Branford Marsalis' band and Lucia Torino of The Devil Makes Three, all the way over to Anthony Monzo of the New Century Chamber Orchestra, and Kevin Smith, Willie Nelson's bass player. I've had many students purchase Upton basses over the years. I've had a lot of colleagues play Upton basses. I see them on gigs all the time. They play great, and Upton stands behind their work. Can't recommend them highly enough. Check them out online at uptonbass.com. So people love to know about gear.
Sure.
And I never ask enough gear questions, and then I get people writing and like, why didn't you ask about gear? So I want to know about the life, the story, and the lesson. But can you talk about gear? So can you talk about your bass? Like, do you know about the history of your bass, and then also like details like what strings are you playing on, bow, just any gear specifics that you're.
Yeah, sure.
using?
I mean, I told you about a little bit about my bass, how I got it, but when I got it, I got a book with ephemera in it about the bass, bills of sale, different things, that came with the bass, and it made me. It's been believed to be a bass from 1648 in Rotterdam by a maker named Joseph Rent, W-R-E-N-T. I was always a little bit suspicious about that for a number of reasons. Although when I bought it, that's what I bought it as. Yeah. And and so I've just always kind of felt like it wasn't quite that old, and but I didn't know what else to call it. Yeah. And so for all practical purposes, they list our instruments in the program books and things. So that's what it's been. And people really enjoy hearing the story about it. It's according to the paperwork that I have, it belonged to somebody who the paperwork only goes back to about the Civil War era, and it belonged to a guy who was who played in the Ford Theater Orchestra, which
Get out of here, really?
Well, that's
that's so cool.
And I have actually the obituary of a guy who owned the bass,
Yeah.
And it talks about his personal friendship with Abe Lincoln.
You have a piece of history for sure. Wow.
So they were good friends, and Lincoln may have plucked. Yeah. I don't know, a bass, but he also sometimes conducted the orchestra, and so it's a really interesting little bit of history and way for people to connect with classical music and connect American history or world history with the history of classical music, and to try to relate to the instrument itself, and like how it's incredible that something with the wood that's like millimeters thick, that was built centuries ago could still be functional today. Yeah. Something that's actually in use and regular use for all these hundreds of years and still functioning and sounding better than ever. It's amazing. And so I've told this story over and over at the request of the management and the situations I've been in, but I just never really trusted that was true, but not having another story. So recently I saw a bass for sale on the Krottenmacher site in Germany, a German bass seller, and all it had was a picture of an F-hole and an outline of the back, a picture of the back, a very distant picture of the back of the bass. And I was just looking at the website, and I saw that F-hole, and I was just like, wow. And the varnish around it, it looked exactly the same color, the same kind of condition as the varnish on my bass, although more of the varnish on the back of my bass. But the shape of the F-holes is totally unique, and I can show that to you. I have some pictures.
Yeah, I love that.
It just piqued my interest. I was like, wow, that looks like my bass. And the F-holes are very unique on my bass, and very close to the edge, very long, elongated, and very sort of flat at the top. Before it takes a turn around the top and the bottom, and very close. Just a very thin line before you get to the round part of the F-hole and stuff. And that in itself just really caught my eye, and so I wrote to the guy who was selling it, and unfortunately it's a 5-string bass, which is awesome. And I would have loved to have that bass, but unfortunately he sold it to a guy in Finland. Okay. But it would have been incredible to have a 4- and 5-string. So anyway, I think this guy was actually the maker of my bass. Okay. And I still have yet to confirm, how solid I don't think the other one has a label either, but being from Germany, I have a feeling they might have a little better clue about where it's from. And so I'm still in contact with a guy in Finland who has this bass, and I want to try to figure out more and see if it actually is the same maker. It's very exciting, and I still don't have confirmation, but Johann Gottlieb Heberlein Johann Heberlein Gottlieb, I believe is the way it goes.
That's the likely.
I think maybe the maker of this instrument. So that's an ongoing project that I'm researching right now.
That's something Scott Pingle, that relatable. We're here in the Bay Area. He's principal bassist of San Francisco Symphony. But Scott, I was interviewing him a few years ago, and he made a comment that I thought is, probably resonate with you, which is like we think we own these instruments, but we're really just caretakers of them for a given
for
time.
Sure.
Yeah,
I've always
they have
felt
a life
that way.
of their own. Yeah.
I've always felt that way about this bass.
Yeah.
Especially this bass. I mean, the basses before me were, that I've had before were nowhere near the quality of this one. But when I had the opportunity to play next to this bass for many years before I owned it, and I just, salivated over it. It's just got this incredible, deep, rich tone that is, just unmatched. I mean, it's just, it's unlike anything you've ever heard, It's just a wonderful, wonderful sound. And when she offered it to me, I was just floored, and I had to make it happen. But anyway, so I had a unique opportunity of actually getting to know this bass, and she even loaned it to me for a tour I did once. And so I really got to know it, and I've been in love with it for years before I got the opportunity to buy it, and I'm so lucky to have it. But yeah, I've always felt like a steward of the instrument rather than the owner, and it's a big responsibility.
It is, and it's something like I play on a more modern bass, although I guess my bass is now 23 years old, so it's still young, but it's
starting to find
it's left its teens, it's getting into, it's graduate from college. But and then in terms of so you finally got your first set of gut strings, and then auditioned, for Philharmonia. Now you've been playing on them for a long time. I know. I'm so ignorant of gut strings. I had a great conversation with John Feeney a couple of years ago about gut strings, and he has this video that he put out for. I'm trying to remember what group in New York. He plays with a few.
St. Luke's, maybe, or American Classical.
Yeah, it was one of those on their YouTube channel. He put out this this 1-minute video of him playing gut strings and talking about the satisfaction of gut strings and how you can put more into it and just give more back.
Yeah, I definitely feel that way. I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's more of a collaborative relationship with a string. And I haven't talked about bows yet.
Yeah.
The bowing, the relationship between the bow and the string is so much different than the modern experience. I feel like with steel strings, you're really sort of doing something to the strings so that they will respond. With a gut string, it's just a much more collaborative experience. You have to invite the string to cooperate with you, And,
I love that. Yeah.
And it's going to have its own mood for that day based on the humidity and the barometric pressure and the heat and the cold and everything. How if it's, what pitch you're trying to play it at.
Sure.
What pitch your instrument has been at, or you're tuning it up to or down to. And it's just I find that there's it took me a while to figure out really how to relate to these strings and how to do it, but it's a much more intimate relationship, I find, and and just I don't know, intimate is a good word for it. People they have or they used to have. I don't think people necessarily think about them this way, but for many years it was like, oh, gut strings, they go out of tune so easily and they're so difficult, and how do you deal, But it's not like they're just a different beast, that's all. Mm-hmm. You learn to anticipate the it's like a living being. It really is an organic object, just like the wood of the bass, just like a human being, ourselves, the players, and it's actually a living organic thing. It's actually intestines from a sheep.
Right. Nowadays,
it was used to be from. They've used all kinds of animals for this, but nowadays it's a sheep gut. So, just like you learn how to humidify your bass when you're going on a flight or something, or going into a colder climate, or you switch, you adjust your bridge if you have adjustable tuners, or there's a lot of things that you do with a modern bass and with a modern bow. I mean, your hair might be tighter in one climate than another. So there's these kind of organic elements that you just it becomes part of you. You just know to do it over time, and so you do those things before, the night before a gig or whatever, before you fly or before you, and so it's just kind of like that. It's just a different creature, and it's for me it's very it's very personal. It's very personal, and the range of color is so much broader than on a gut string. People think they're softer than metal strings, but I don't find that to be true at all. And I think
anyone who's heard you play would know that you put out a tremendous sound. So
thank you. I mean, when it calls for it, it can definitely produce for you, but you can also get these very soft, furry, just wonderful, beautiful, gentle tones out of it. So I feel like the palette of color available from a gut string is so much broader than what you can get from a metal string. And but there's so many other parts of that in terms of period playing. Vibrato is a big element of it, which, and then the bow and the way you use the bow, it's not, the camber wasn't yet introduced yet to the bows. And so what the camber does basically is it transfers the tension that you're able to create at the frog to the tip.
Our modern bows, right? Yeah, camber. Okay.
And so you're able to get as big a sound at the tip, maybe with a little bit more effort, but you can, it's a different machine. It really is a modern bow with the camber. The introduction of camber really changed things for bowing. And also the introduction of the ferrule on the frog, the little metal stopper, basically. It's like a nut, for the hair, like you have on strings on an instrument. And so it creates this point of tension that with the Baroque bows, you can you don't have that. I mean, there is the edge of the frog, that the hair passes over.
Right.
The hair still goes underneath that slide, and
I know I can't remember the name of
ferrule.
The ferrule. There we go. Okay.
It's really the same mechanism, It's a bunch of hair tied at both ends, tucked into a hole, and then stopper stuck in there to keep it there.
Yeah.
That's really, and then the tensioning of the bow with the screw. Some of the bows actually don't have the tensioner, and you do it in different ways with clip-in frogs and things. You can slip more like a piece of leather under the hair to tighten it a little bit. You actually use your finger with a Baroque bow. For one thing, it's basically a decrescendo from the frog to the tip and a crescendo from the tip to the frog. And so that really helps you to figure out how to use the bow in terms of phrasing and how to shape your phrases by choosing your bowings. And then you can also, the job of the ferrule was to create this point of tension where you can just get a real strong accent at the frog or whatever. But the way you do that with a Baroque bow is you actually pull the hair up with your finger. You hold up the bow higher toward the, away from the frog. It's different with every bow because the weight is distributed differently with every bow.
Yeah.
But generally the grip is a little bit higher, the bow hold. And I like to say hold instead of grip, personally, but so you can adjust that tension by how much you pull on it. And there are two different ways to hold these bows. You can hold them underhand, which is more of a akin to the German style grip, But you can also hold them overhand, which would be more of the French style. But in both instances, you have a finger on the hair, and you can affect the amount of tension at the frog, and so that's a lot of fun to play with.
Yeah.
And to use. It's like pianos with a soft pedal and 3 pedals, and they used to have 2 pedals, things are 1 pedal, and so it's another element to play with that's just not present on a modern bow at all.
Yeah, that's that collaborative relationship you were describing.
Yeah, exactly.
Really. Wow. Okay.
But also inviting the string to begin vibrating. It's not so much, put your bow on the string, put the weight in the string, and pull. It's more of a scooping kind of thing, really, to get the string vibrating, to get it into motion. And how you do that scoop. There's quick scoops, there's long, slow scoops, there's, and there's the distance from the bridge that affects how that's going to sound. So it's and then also there's a lot of, like, with the bowing, just a very different use of the bow in general, which is so much fun. Like, if you want to, like, instead of returning to the frog all the time with, like, dotted rhythms or ta-da, like you go frog, dup, and then back to the frog, the ta-da. But with a Baroque bow, I mean, the ta-da is going to be kind of at the end of a phrase. So it's like it's about that first note, right? Dum ta-da. It's like a bouncing ball, big bounce, smaller bounces after that. So you can just kind of travel out. We do something called like a Z bow. It's kind of a nickname for it, where you play the first note, maybe at the frog, and then the smaller note's not going to it only brings you back as much as a small note would to the frog, instead of lifting it off the string,
Yeah.
So you just come back a little bit to play that, and then play the other note, like, farther out in the bow, where it really you get the natural decay just by doing it that way. And so I've just learned, and it just makes playing a lot more fun, really. And that doesn't even go into the whole temperament kind of thing and all of that stuff for intonation. There was a lot of struggle with intonation in the early days. People have learned to navigate that a lot more nowadays. And that's a whole other thing to talk about. But it's a fascinating... It kind of saved me, because I was on a trajectory to be a soloist. I studied with soloists all from an early age. My brother was a cellist, so I just thought that's how I should play the bass, and played a lot of cello music growing up, and learned a lot from my brother, who was a cellist. And but I just, I found like solo playing to be a kind of a lonely endeavor, and musically lonely as well. It's all up to you, and there's not the collaboration that you get from chamber music, and which I found so gratifying in the early music community, because even though it's a larger ensemble, and it's not exactly a concerto all the time, you're playing continuo is a very rewarding position to be in within an ensemble, and it gives you a lot of control over the shape of the phrases and the sound of the ensemble, and I find it endlessly fascinating, and I just love doing it.
It's a remarkable art form. I go in every winter. I've still been going back to Chicago to do this, although that may end now that I live out here in San Francisco, but I've been going and playing with the Apollo Chorus in Chicago, and they hire a lot of Baroque players. It's kind of one of those mixed groups, right, where a lot of people are on Baroque instruments at 440. I'm on my modern Jackson, but the bassist who plays principal bass, Jerry Fuller. Oh, yeah. I've watched, I think, probably 10 years or more, probably, of Jerry playing, all of Messiah. I'm playing the choruses, and I'm just like watching. It is just, continuo playing is such a deep, fascinating, ever varied, from my perspective, art form. I can see how you'd never get bored exploring that. There's just always something new to try and explore, and the timbres and colors and interactions. And
well, the interactions, that's a big part of it, is like playing. I can play the way I play, but and I can try to influence if I feel like I have something to offer. I can try to influence the way other people are playing. But other times I feel like I've got a lot to learn, from the cellist, for example, or the harpsichord player. And so sometimes I'm kind of ghosting their musicality in a way, like I'm riding on their musicality and trying to support what they're doing because I find it more interesting than what I might have to offer, and it's endlessly, I can learn so much from the people I collaborate with. And so I've, it's just very fulfilling, and it feels like it keeps me alive, inside as a musician.
Yeah.
And I see so many. When I was a younger player, thinking about my, what my career was going to be, I just saw a lot of burned out symphony players, and that was supposed to be what I was supposed to want to do, which is why I thought, well, okay, then maybe I want to be a soloist. And I enjoyed solo playing very much, but then when I got out into the real world doing that, it's like, well, this is kind of not really that much fun. It's a lot of work and kind of lonely. And so, yeah, it's it's a very collaborative musically, which is very enriching.
I think a lot about when I'm playing these various different regional orchestras about that soloist, and they're going to go back to their hotel room in Elgin, Illinois, or wherever they happen to be playing. Do you talk about what? Yeah, it seems glamorous. Probably ain't so glamorous when we actually get down to you're going to the Applebee's in the suburb or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, speaking of Kurt, and this is super fun, and I want to be respectful of your time and not talk you to death. But we definitely need to do a round two or something topic because there's so much. But talking about careers, and you've got this super cool career that a lot of and the early music world, period playing world, has obviously changed a lot before you were doing it and then ever since you've been doing it. And I usually wrap up with some sort of question like, if you could go back, and you can pick the age, but go talk to Kristin when she was at Northwestern and about to take off to Norway, or you pick the age, but some younger version of yourself, and give her some advice, knowing what you know now.
Advice about what?
Advice about whatever.
Well, I think it's important to listen to your own voice and to try to develop it, whether you're a soloist or an orchestral player, and just try to learn as much as you can from as many people as you can. Take as many master classes as you can, when you're in school. Go to the other instruments, master classes, and see what you can learn from other players, not just bass players. And I think especially in the bass world, it's important to look outside of the bass world, because I feel like I think that our development has been oppressed in many ways for many years on certain levels, and a lot of things are acceptable in the bass world that would never be acceptable on other instruments, and that always bothered me. I mean, I had the distinct advantage, I think, of studying with non-bass players early on, and so I was held to a different standard in a lot of ways. And, shitty tone, undetectable pitches on low strings, slides between notes, just the kind of sloppy technical stuff that's so rampant in the bass world. I'm sorry to say that, but I'm afraid that it's true, and I don't blame individual players so much as just sort of a tradition that's permeated the community, and I think that it's important to really try to be your own voice in whatever you choose to do, and to study with as many different players, and as a bass player, we have the opportunity to study so many different styles and play different styles, and it can only enrich any kind of playing that you want to do, to try to explore as much as you can. Yeah. So I guess that would be my advice.
That's great advice. That's great advice. Thank you so much. This is super fun. Kristin, thank you so much for chatting. Folks, links to everything we talked about, and we talked about a lot, are in the show notes, as well as all that information on gear that Kristin uses. What a cool person, huh? I had so much fun chatting with you, Kristin, and we definitely need to do it again soon. Conversations like this, I have said it many times, but we're scraping the surface here, right? We could talk for 10 hours and still barely get into some of these topics. So think of this as an introduction. And fortunately, Kristin and I both live here in the Bay Area, so got to do it again sometime soon. Thank you so much for listening to this. We have covered early music in the past, and you can find episodes relating to that at contrabassconversations.com/earlybass. And as I scroll through that, I see conversations with Heather Miller-Lardon, John Feeney, Tracy Rowell, Jerry Fuller, Philip Cerna, and I think that's it. So I should do some more conversations with people in that world. I know it's an area of great interest. And while you're at the website, go ahead and send me a message and let me know who you'd like to hear more of in terms of guests, whether it's a past guest or a new guest. And obviously, if you're listening to this, early music's probably of interest to you, but maybe there's another topic that's also of interest that we could cover or that you'd like to hear more of. And feedback at contrabassconversations.com will put you in touch with me. I respond to each and every message, and I just love hearing from people, sitting down and opening my email and hearing from people all across the globe. It's such a thrill. While you're at the website, get on our email list and stay up to date with what's going on in terms of the podcast, what's happening in the bass world, events, news, all that kind of stuff. We deliver each Friday via email. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. Mitch is making beautiful basses in the Dallas area, Dallas, Texas. I had the chance to check out some of his basses recently, and wow, it's outstanding work. Learn more at mitchmooring.com. And thank you to Krista Copper for cataloging and archiving all the topics that we cover on the podcast. That's what we use to generate shows about a specific topic, like auditioning, like teaching, jazz, technique, business advice for jazz players, all that kind of stuff we've covered in the past. And you can find all of that, by the way, at contrabassconversations.com/highlights. I'm your host, Jason Heath, coming to you each and every week from San Francisco, California, or in this case, Oakland, California, with Kristin. And we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.